Welcome back to another video. We all know that webcam video sucks, so let's fix it once and for all. Let's take a look at some side-by-side samples of Camo Studio against a variety of other webcams. Online video streaming, video conferencing, and video collaboration is part of our everyday lives. Almost everyone that I know uses either Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Skype, or Zoom on a daily basis. Webcams are the easiest way to participate and collaborate with others from anywhere in the world through the internet. It's safe to assume that at this point, webcams are just like cell phones. Everyone has one. And that's what makes it so frustrating, because that is the one piece of tech that no matter how much money you throw at it, how much you spend on trying to upgrade that webcam, no matter which webcam you end up buying, the results are just flat out underwhelming and disappointing. And this is why so many creators, online coaches, consultants, and YouTube channels suggest that the only way to fix this is by upgrading to a mirrorless camera. In other words, dump the webcam and buy a $500 plus mirrorless camera. And the reality is that not everyone has $500 or more to spend on a camera to try to make that solution work. And now you don't have to. I'm going to show you an email and then I'm going to explain. I wrote this email in response to a sponsorship request by Camo Studio. I literally wrote back to her saying, I may not need your sponsorship. This may be what I've been looking for personally and for my clients. So don't stress about giving me a free license. That's not going to change my interest. This video is sponsored by Camo Studio. They did provide the free license, so thank you Camo Studio for sponsoring today's video. In short, Camo Studio allows you to use your Apple or Android, both Apple and Android smartphone as a webcam. So now let's take a look at some side-by-side samples of Camo Studio against a variety of other webcams. All right, so let's get started with these side-by-side comparisons. And right now what I'm doing is I have several cameras rigged up. The one you guys are looking at me through now happens to be the built-in FaceTime cam on my MacBook Pro, and it's doing a decent job, but as you can see, everything in the background is completely blown out. It doesn't really look great, and also because I'm using a laptop, I'm having to look down instead of where my natural eyesight would be. So that's it's not optimal. Let's just say it's not optimal, but overall it's doing a decent job, right? This is not too horrible. The background is incredibly distracting, and if we're doing this for professional reasons, that's not going to cut it. So let's switch over to a very, very popular webcam, which happens to be by Logitech. So the Logi 4K Pro. This is the version that was made for the Pro XDR display and when the Mac Pro was released. So let's switch to that camera now. And as you can see, this camera struggles, right? Like I look like I'm not even in focus. There's clearly a problem with this camera. Not really sure why that is. I have the ability to correct the software, make some changes with their own software. So if I do, like I just took it out of autofocus and I'm gonna try to focus myself, it just never quite gets sharp enough. And this is supposed to be a 4K camera. So there are problems there. The other thing is that I had to turn HDR off, because if I turn HDR on, watch what happens. So this is HDR off, HDR on. Clearly this camera that was made for Apple devices, it's horrible. It's horrible. This is why I say webcams suck. So let's turn HDR off, because we're not doing it any favors by keeping that on. Now I'm going to switch over to another camera. This is another very expensive camera, also in the $200 range. This one is made by Dell. It's the one that has AI auto framing, but that only works with Windows computers. I don't have a Windows computer, but let's switch to that camera. And this is now the Dell 4K Ultra HD high dynamic range AI auto framing $200 webcam. It's not great. It blows the background out way more than the other cameras. And there isn't a piece of software that I can manipulate the image to try to get a better looking image. In fact, if I move out of the frame, it just corrected itself, right? So now the background works. If I step back into frame, it's basically doing auto corrections all on its own based on what's in frame. So this is what we get out of the Dell 4K Ultra HD high dynamic range AI auto framing. I don't even know what the model number is, but ultimately those are $200 that went down the drain, right? And now let's take a look at what Camo Studio is able to provide when we use our iPhone as a webcam. And this is a much more natural image. It's much better balanced. Clearly, I'm in a very difficult and tough situation here, lighting wise, because I'm being backlit. You saw all the cameras struggle with it. The one that struggled the least was the built-in FaceTime cam, and that's because it's not at eye level. It's actually aiming more towards the ceiling. In other words, there's less sunshine in the entire scene, so it's able to expose a little bit better. This to me is acceptable. If I had to sit through a meeting in this exact scenario, I would be okay. There is a way to improve everything for all the cameras, and we will show that now. And what I'll do is I have a light, I have this light. It's made by Sunwell, and it's an RGB WW light. It's a tube style light that you can dim. It's battery powered, so it's very easy. I'm just gonna turn it on. There it is. Now it's on. And now what I'm doing is I'm putting it off to the side of my computer, and I'm gonna begin to turn it until my exposure gets a little bit better. So let's see what actually works here. Now it's about halfway through. Now I have pretty decent exposure on my face without a lot of harsh shadows. So this is a good option. And this is probably what I would do if I had to run a conference in this exact scenario where I'm working from home and our house has windows basically on every wall. So no matter which direction I turn, I'm gonna end up at some capacity being backlit, which is the reason why having a light helps. Let's see how the other cameras are doing now that we have a little bit of light to help with balance out the exposure. So we'll start with the FaceTime camera. That's where we started. And as you guys can see, the image got a lot cleaner, got a lot better. It's doing just a little bit of light helped it quite a bit. Out of all of the cameras, you know, the Logi is a 4K camera. The Dell is a 4K camera. The cell phone is a 4K camera, except Camo Studio only allows for a 1080 signal to be sent out, which is fine because 1080 is more than enough for live streaming and conferences. So that's okay. And then the built-in FaceTime camera is also just a 1080 camera. So these 1080 cameras are outperforming the 4K cameras. That's really where I'm going with this. Let's take a look at Logi, the one that was completely fuzzy and just wouldn't focus. As you can see here, it just doesn't get better. As I share my screen here, you can see what the controls are. And as I mentioned, I turned HDR off because HDR on doesn't really make any difference. And even having a light source now to help with the exposure, it still only makes the image more horrible. Going to widescreen didn't really change anything, and it didn't help. And maybe if I switch nope, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't work. But the autofocus, if I turn it off, You can see it tries to focus. It looks like it's doing a better job. I still look pretty blurry. So this camera, in my opinion, if you guys can save your money and don't ever think about buying it, it's kind of horrible. It is what it is. So let's go back to just talking head portion here, and let's look at what the Dell camera looks like now. So here's the Dell camera with a bit of lighting to help with the exposure on my face. And it certainly is helping, but as you can see, the background is completely destroyed. And the other thing that you might notice is that it looks like we're stuttering. So if you own a Mac, don't buy the Dell 4K Ultra HD camera. It doesn't work really well. To get this little bit of stutter out, what I have to do is I have to launch the photo booth app and then select the Dell camera, and that seems to bring it back into a little bit of more normalness. Again, there aren't any controls, so what you see is what you get here. The camera doesn't look terrific. And now let's see what Camo Studio actually looks like. And again, to me, this is probably the best looking of all of the different images because it's just more natural. It just looks a lot better. And why it is that I'm excited about this piece of software. So what I'll do now, since I'm on the Camo camera, I should show you what their interface and their software looks like so you can see sort of what your options are. And let me just launch that here. Camo Studio. And I need to make sure that I'm sharing my screen. And there we go. This is the Camo Studio. I'm gonna mute myself out of the picture-in-picture because you guys can see me anyway as I'm making these different changes. So here's their software, and this is the interface. It's super easy. Basically, you plug it in, and once you launch and you are in fact connected with a lightning cable, you're ready to go. It's that simple. You can see the device name that is connected. You can see the battery percentage on that device. I think that's important. You can see the mode and then which lens you're using. For modes, let me just show you what the differences are. So they have this thing called Portrait Beta. It's in beta. And what it'll do is it'll blur out the background and make the background essentially less distracting when you're presenting. That's a good feature, I think. We've seen it tried to be implemented on things like Zoom and Skype, and I think everybody does this at this point. Even Google Meet does it, and of course Teams. But what you always see is tearing along the edges, where there's like a halo of things that are sharp and then things get really unsharp or blurry in the background. This is doing a much better job in my opinion, but it does soften up the image more than maybe I would want it to. If you use basic portrait, that actually works better. That's using, this is not in beta, so it's going to be better. And there isn't as much tearing, but there is tearing. You could see it as I move about, how there's some tearing in the images where things stay sharp and then they get unsharp. So I think that's what they're trying to fix with the beta mode, but there's still a little bit, it's just not as much. Nobody's really doing this when they're presenting, right? So maybe it doesn't even matter. And then they have this thing called mute background. This is like a novelty thing. Who would use that? I have no idea. I will never use it. So for me, it would be either normal or portrait if I was going to use it at all. Then you can select which lens you're using on your phone, because the iPhone has more than one lens, just like a lot of other Android phones. So right now I'm using the regular wide. If I want to do the ultra wide lens, it will allow me to switch to the ultra wide lens, which is kind of cool. If you have, let's say you're doing a cooking show, or you're doing some sort of tutorial on, I don't know, like a plumbing tutorial, how to change out a sink or something like that, where you might need to show a lot more of whatever it is that you're discussing. it comes in handy, and you know that the cameras on the iPhone are actually really good. It also gives you the ability to choose the telephoto lens, which the telephoto lens, obviously 3x zoom, it's pretty intense, right? It's pretty intense. So let's go back to the regular wide lens. And of course you can choose the selfie lens, which would mean that you'd have to flip the phone in the other direction. For those of you that don't already know, the cameras on the back of your phone are much better than the selfie cameras. That's just the way that works. I mentioned that Camo Studio is only able to receive a 1080 signal into whatever software you're using, whether it's Teams, Zoom, Skype, Google Meet, or any other live streaming. If you want to do live streaming from or use your phone to live stream, you can certainly do that too. You could select 720p. If you're on a wireless network, 720 might actually give you better results than 1080. If you are tethered or you have an Ethernet connection, 1080 might be better. If you're just recording to your computer, always pick the highest resolution, because then you don't have to worry about whatever might happen as you're streaming out to the cloud. And then audio, you can select which microphone your phone is picking up the audio from to send off to whatever your conferencing software is. If you have an external mic, of course, the external conferencing software or live streaming software also allows you to select your audio input and output. So that's available. And then you can create your own presets. These presets are, again, novelty, not something that we would use for business. But I guess if somebody wants to clown around, let me just show you. Like, this is the saturation buff, saturation nerf. You know, I don't know. I don't like them. Mono. Who would do that? Not me. Synthware 1980s. Again, for me, these are all just novelty, not something that I would ever consider using. And then they have the ability to mirror your video. That generally means if you're monitoring yourself and you point to the left, you're pointing to the left as you're monitoring yourself. But if you're wearing, say, your company logo on your shirt, or your channel name, or your streaming name, or whatever it may be that actually has writing, it will show up to the audience in reverse mode. So if at ever possible, don't mirror your cameras. We see that all the time on TikTok and stories and on basically every platform. It's not a cool thing. I just wouldn't do it. I'd avoid it. And then you can have an overlay. You can also rotate your video. It's easier to rotate the phone than it is to use the software to rotate it. So I'm not sure why that was included, but maybe it's mounted permanently somewhere, and that's just the way, convenience factor. And of course you could zoom in. So it's kind of cool that it gives you those abilities in case you need to, I don't know, get something out of the frame, you can zoom in. And then the best part about the app is really all this other side, which allows you to further manipulate the exposure in a way that gets you the best possible picture. So right now everything is on auto mode. So if I choose to manipulate my own exposure, I can select how much of the background I want to bring in, and then manipulate my light, if I'm using light, to determine what I want to show and how much of whatever it is I might want to show. So having that extra control comes in handy, and as you saw, that didn't work really well with the Logicam, and it didn't work at all with the Dell Cam because I'm on a Mac and the camera was made for a Windows computer. You can also set your ISO. I haven't changed the ISO because I haven't found a need to. Flash level, I'm not sure why we would need that unless somebody has the light turned on the actual phone, which happens to also then be the flash. Again, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's there if you need it. and you can make other image adjustments like brightness. This basically changes your contrast. So let me show you. If I go this way, it crunches my contrast, and if I go this way, it washes it out. So why they call it brightness, I'm not sure, because it's really contrast adjustment. And then you have hue, saturation, and then they have contrast back here too, which is doing the same thing as the brightness, but whatever. And they have a gamma adjustment in case you needed to make a gamma adjustment for some reason, to make sure that your colors are dialed in. The extra control is really what the bonus is, and that's the benefit of having a piece of software like this Camo Studio, and why it is that I'm so pumped. I'm going to move to a different location just so that I'm going to try to optimize basically the image quality out of all of these cameras so you guys can see what that looks like in a comparison and side by side. So this is as optimized as I can get it in our house. There are some windows here that are going to get blown out likely by all the cameras, but ultimately I am sitting directly in front of a wall of windows, and then off to the sides additional windows. So I'm effectively in a light box. So this is as good as the light is going to get in the house without adding artificial lights or trying to manipulate the scene more. And of course, the whole thing of using webcams is convenience, right? So no one really has time to set up a studio setup and then light for every nuance when you're jumping on a conference call. That's just not the way that it works. So again, this is what we get out of the built-in FaceTime camera. Now let me show you what Camo Studio is able to do. This is the Camo Studio camera. As you can see, it's managing those highlights that I was talking about way, way, way better, right? Way better. And the image overall, I think, speaks for itself. That's why I'm kind of pumped about this. If I was using their blur the background, let me show you what that looks like. Just need to turn this on, and I'm going to enable portrait beta. And now the background is basically a little bit more muted because it's not sharp, and our eyes are naturally drawn to whatever is in focus, not the things that are out of focus. So it could actually help in a scenario like this one. So again, this is what we're getting out of Camo Studio. Pretty nice, and why it is that I'm all pumped about it. Let me show you the other webcams. The Dell webcam actually is not doing a horrible job. It looks okay. It's a little dark, probably because of the way that it's trying to manage the exposure in the scene overall. It's not bad. Let me show you Logi 4K. Here's Logi 4K. This camera, I tried using the software to get it to look as good as I can in this best case type scenario for the location, and it just fails time and time again. So my favorite, of course, is Camo Studio, but let me show you a side-by-side of all the cameras in their best possible environment so you can see what that actually looks like and then make your own decision. Like seriously, would you rather, if you had to make a choice, would you rather go with the FaceTime camera, or would you rather go with the Logi 4K, or would you rather go with the Dell AI something or other camera, or Camo Studio? I'm gonna pick Camo Studio 10 out of 10 times. It's just a better camera, it's a better system, it's a better way to use your cell phone, and it saves you a ton of cash. All you need is a cell phone, which likely you already own, and you need the cable that allows you to connect to your computer from your phone. So in my case, a lightning to USB-C into my computer, launch the software, launch the app, and I'm ready to go. No matter what software I'm using. It could be Teams, it could be Google Meet, it could be Skype, Zoom, I could be live streaming to Vimeo, Facebook, LinkedIn. I could be recording my own presentation, like a PowerPoint presentation, for example, have it run in the background, have green screen behind me so that I still have my little talking head portion there. This can solve so many issues for so many people in so many industries. From live streaming, your cooking show, your how-to show, your tutorials, to education, like literally teachers can use their phone and end up with a much better product when they're doing e-learning with students. And of course, all of us in the private business sector, when we're meeting with people virtually, this is a much better look than going with a traditional webcam. Now let's go back to the studio and wrap this up. I really hope that you guys found the information helpful. Please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next video or live stream. And if you feel like being awesome, smash the like button. I appreciate you. And I am genuinely curious. What do you guys think about the image quality comparisons? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments. Until next time, I'm Carlos, and I will catch up with you guys in the comments. Take care.